Capitalism's crisis, how to organise. I think the first thing that needs to be said generally about this topic is that whatever answers we come up with, it's certainly not business as usual for the left. I think precisely for some of the reasons that we've been looking at over the week with Hillel and others, this crisis is unique. It's got unique dynamics. We are entering a new period, and I think that necessitates new thinking and a fresh approach from the left. We talked about the problems that the capitalist class has in terms of formulating its own strategy, and I think in terms of discussing our response, our alternative, we also have to take on board that the left, precisely given the defeats of the 20th century, the nature of Stalinism, is also in a bit of a crisis, and I think it's important we realise that, take that on board, and look to overcome these problems that we find. Because what the working class internationally obviously lacks is a party formation. We see a sea of competing, hostile, bureaucratically controlled formations which have little or no relation to the working class movement itself, and are often even counterposed to that movement in articulating their own interests and replicating their own little groups. This disunity is something we must immediately take head on in order to fight for what is obviously objectively necessary in these conditions. Not a party of labourism, but a party precisely of Marxism, with Marxist solutions, global solutions to what is quite obviously a global crisis. As anyone said, the working class without a party is nothing, but with a party it is everything, and I think that is precisely what we must have in mind in discussing how we organise and fight back. So what sort of party do we need then? The first obvious thing to be said is that the left actually needs to organise and fight for, openly and honestly, the politics it purports to uphold, the basic political principles of Marxism, and were that to be the case overnight, we'd be definitely in a stronger position. But what are, in my opinion, the fundamental political goals of Marxism and the principles we should organise around? Firstly, class political independence from the bourgeois state. No government coalitions with the bourgeoisie, and to fight for, as Kautsky put it, a party of irreconcilable, consistent and unshakable opposition. For internationalism, one of the greatest poisons of the workers' movement of the 20th century, holding our movement back, was the theory, so-called, of socialism in one country. We have to be clear that from the start, in terms of organising our movement is international. It takes the unity of the international working class above all else. Increasingly, that also means that in terms of communists operating in Great Britain, we have to think increasingly on the level of the European Union and taking the fight to the highest possible level that we can. Extreme democracy, there are two elements of this that we in the CPGB raise. Extreme democracy as against the state, therefore the working class becoming the hegemon in the fight for democracy, in the fight for workers' rule. So some of the demands we discussed this week: annual elections, instant recallability, representative on a workers' wage and a popular militia, part of this struggle for the democratic republic, the form of working class rule. But there's another element to extreme democracy, which I think is absolutely crucial in the fight to articulate genuine Marxist politics again and struggle for a party. And that is extreme democracy within our own movement itself, against these regimes that exist on the left at the moment, erecting shibboleths to keep their purity from other groups, etc. That's part of it. And also the struggle against opportunism must be conducted in the most open, democratic and polemical fashion possible, because it achieves clarity about where we actually do disagree and gets rid of rhetoric and bluster, etc., that are keeping our movement divided. I think that's absolutely important. Comrade Stuart King last week made the point that the left at the moment is too polemical, and I think he couldn't be more wrong. I think actually the left avoids serious polemic, serious engagement with each other's ideas, and I think that is part of the struggle for clarifying our movement and what we need to do. Also, we need to break with the current orthodoxy on the left of this notion of Leninism. And I think the discussions that we've had with Lars Lee this week have been particularly instructive to that, because at the moment, as I've outlined before, the left, it seems to be organising on a model of which is almost, again, an insult to the Bolsheviks post-1921. It's almost as if you might forgive it if we were organising in civil war conditions, huge state repression, but it's absolutely not justified. And as I say, this model of Leninism, so-called, is actually a product of the defeat of our working class movement, not its strengths. And I think what it does do is articulate pre-Marxist forms of organisation, which Marx struggled against, particularly in the First International. We have to get that question absolutely crystal clear. And obviously, this unity is not something we can put off to tomorrow. This is not something that we can say, okay, well, obviously we're a little bit weak at the moment, but maybe if we go along and things start to move, maybe somehow spontaneously this will create a dynamic towards unity. Now, there's an element of truth in that, but I think unless we actually address head-on the questions now and fight for the organisation now that we need, then if we don't do that, we're going to be necessarily weaker in future times. And one of the main I think polemical tasks that we have to fight for in agitating for Marxism in all avenues of struggle is breaking with this notion, again, which I'm not quite sure where it comes from, but it's this notion today that basically the task of Marxists in this period is to somehow set up formations that they know to be insufficient and programmatically not delimited between reform and revolution as some sort of catching mechanism, as some sort of signpost to sort of meet the masses halfway, as it were, and use it as a signpost towards Marxism. As Rosa Luxemburg points out quite lucidly in a polemic with Edward Bernstein, these manifestations of opportunism are not actually signposts towards Marxism, they actually lead in different directions. I think, again, we have to bear that in mind when coming to formulating our alternative and our approach, because quite clearly, again, the point was made during the week's discussions, which I thought was useful. The left, the Marxist left, so-called, trying to create formations such as the SLP, Socialist Alliance, or Socialist Party Respect, is not just an insult to Bolshevism, but as comrades have pointed out, it's an insult to Menshevism. I think that the strategic question for our movement today is how to precisely break with labourism in a positive fashion, and that means articulating the need for a Marxist party and struggling for that. What about the CPGB? What are we arguing for? What are we doing? How are we doing it? We are firmly committed to the fight for a Marxist party that can win millions to its banner. We have to break with this conception of the, as I say, the top-down vanguard party. We want a mass party. For Lenin and Kautsky, there was no real distinction between mass and vanguard. It was highlighting and bringing together the vanguard of the class, the best elements, but with a view to winning the majority of the working class, because socialism is the conscious act of the majority, a point that Marx made, again, against the anarchists. We have to have a project for that and win millions to our banner. But that's obviously going to take time. We have to intervene where political initiatives throw themselves up and fight for what's needed. And that's what we've done over the last period. In the face of quite hostile opposition at times, we've intervened in these projects and said, no, we need to go in a partyist direction, and it's Marxism that matters, it's principle that matters. But clearly for us, because we want to be a mass party of the working class in that sense, we don't, it doesn't follow from that we say, well, anyone's welcome, right? Anyone's welcome on any basis. So you're a worker, come and join us. You want revolution, okay, come and join us. What for us is important in the CPGB is the question of programme. And programme as being the highest form of the working class theory and memory, and a guide to political action. That's what matters for us, and we look to unite around the acceptance of that programme. So it's not about agreeing on every particular point on the national question, on this historical question, because that's not how parties are built. What it's about acceptance of the programme as a whole, and the ability, and actually the duty, to articulate disagreements where they raise themselves within the framework of the programme on tactical questions, in terms of different lines that are taken on different questions. That is the sort of model that we look to for genuine unity, not a bureaucratic unity where minorities are silenced and not allowed to articulate themselves, but actually genuine unity, which must be fought for and won and constantly rerun in a process of open political struggle, which can then also educate the working class, reading our press, coming to our meetings, etc. So that's why, for us, we put on events like the Communist University to get extremely interesting speakers from different traditions together to articulate their views on the discussions, the questions of the day. And this final session, I think, really is the question we need to think about coming from this university. What have we learned during the course of the week that can inform our drive to unity? And we welcome comments obviously contributing to this, also to the weekly worker. The weekly worker is absolutely crucial in the fight for a Communist Party, precisely because it allows comrades to take up these discussions and have serious principled discussions about where to go forward. And yeah, I think I'll stop there. We basically welcome the drive to a Marxist party. We'll be at the heart of that, the core of that, and those who accept our principles and our programme, we urge you to join us. Those who don't work with us in the fight for what's objectively and increasingly necessary in these times, and that is a Marxist party.
Well, I don't have that much to say, which may be a surprise. I don't disagree, of course, with the need to form a Marxist party. We had a little experience of it a couple of years ago, or whatever, and somehow it didn't work out. I think we might have learned a little bit about that. The question isn't, to me, whether we need a Marxist party. That's obvious. The question is, how do we get there? And I have to say, I may have read Lenin, but I haven't learned how to do it. I don't know how we are going to get there, and I have to say right away that I don't even have a modicum of a solution. That's why it's short. No, it won't be short, but I intend it to be short. I don't know how we are going to get there. To say that that's the goal is absolutely correct, but that doesn't get us there. I don't believe that the change to socialism will be spontaneous. I don't believe the working class simply acts spontaneously, although there is spontaneous action of a kind. I do think there has to be an organisation, and I do think the bourgeoisie will do its best to stop it. And therefore the idea of simple action and taking power is simply not going to happen. And in principle, if you didn't have a revolutionary party, there would be no change as far as I can see. However, the question is, how do we get there? Well, the good thing, as we can all see, is that the semi-ideology which was introduced the last 20, 30 years was a reactionary utopia of the market. The efficient market has been exploded. It hasn't been entirely exploded, but it's been exploded. It's not easy for people to simply go around and say the market is more efficient than social democracy or any alternative. Clearly they can't do that quite so easily, though they're still doing it, but it's no longer there in quite the same way. It's also true that there's a series of muddles, lack of understanding, and nonsense which is around. Nonetheless, it has cracked. That is nonsense we know from various opinion polls, and following on your last session, I think there was an opinion poll in the United States which showed that 25% of American people think that the cause of the downturn is the Jews. So obviously you're not going to organize people very easily while that remains the case. Though it does bring out Trotsky's statement that anti-Semitism increases in every crisis. The question remains in large part because of the failure and the horror of Stalinism, and in part because of social democracy itself. But both of them have got, or largely got. China isn't just a Stalinist state, although there's an aspect of Stalinism in it clearly. So to a large degree that's no longer there. However, what is there is a general view, which most people take, that the introduction of socialism as we understand it, society where labour becomes mankind's prime want, that however desirable it is utopian, and worse than utopian. Because it is utopian, the argument is Stalinism, or a version of it, or horror, or whatever you want, is bound to arise along the way. If you go for a utopian project, you will end up like the USSR. Well, that's put forward very clearly by Martin Amis, but it's very widely held that it's impossible, in effect, to get to a social society. And I think, in fact, if you ask most people once you outline what socialism is, whether they want to say, yeah, wonderful. That isn't the problem. The problem today is to overcome the history of the last 100 years and to be able to explain it, to be able to get people to take the next step, as it were. See, that is where we actually are. Ben pointed out that it's a new period. Yes, it is a new period. Not just in the fact that it started and social democracy are finished, but also because of the capitalist crisis. And they're not going to get out of this in any profound sense. Obviously, there's going to be an upturn. As you can see now, they're talking of a 1% rate of growth. And every time they're talking of a green shoot, there's a brown shoot. So clearly, they're not going to get out of this. Obviously, objectively, as I was arguing earlier, objectively the circumstances are there, and to a degree, the subjective circumstances are also there. I don't think the program of CPGB is put forward then will work, either in terms of its attack on labourism or in terms of extreme democracy. It appears to me what people want is not a reiteration of the terms democracy. Of course, in the deeper sense, that's what we all want. That's saying the deeper sense would be one in which there was control from below, a society in which everybody has an input and so forth, which of course goes far beyond democracy. But I understand that that's what's really meant. However, the term democracy itself is so tarnished, we have to look at what it looks like today. Parliamentary democracy?
Absolutely right.
Well, it's clearly dying, as I argued, of course, in the last session that I spoke at. It itself is dying. Therefore, slogans around democracy just don't work, particularly if you call yourself the Communist Party of Great Britain, when there's a history of the Communist parties talking of nothing but democracy. When you have people's democracies, just as a slogan, it just doesn't work. Of course, if you explain it in detail and so on a slogan, it isn't going to work. The demand has to be for socialism itself. And as I say, there's the problem. Most people, once you start to explain what it is, agree. Think it's a wonderful idea. The problem is how you actually get there without liquidating half the population, as it were. Well, I don't have a solution as to how to be able to overcome this gap. What I also don't agree is that the question is one of dealing with the Labour Party bureaucracy or the trade union bureaucracy or labourism. I think that's largely dead today. But Brown's done a wonderful job, really good job in this respect. And who on earth wants a Labour Party? You'd have to be a nutcase to want the Labour Party. The only reason why anybody will vote for the Labour Party is because it's not the Conservative Party, and maybe they think it's the lesser evil now, which is why they always going to vote. But that's all. This Labour Party has clearly moved to the right of the Conservative Party. It's introduced some of the most draconian laws that in British history. It's attacked the working class openly. Why? I mean, the idea that people now are hung up on labourism is fantastic. They're not. They may be stuck with it, but that is another matter. Okay, so do I have a solution? The answer is I don't have a solution. But I think what we have to do is proceed step by step in moving towards a party. In other words, have some kind of way of getting there. And the only way we can do that is pragmatically trying to find steps which will get to the population. And for that matter, I mean, I'm certainly not against what Chris did with the drama that he did in trying to get through the people. But I think one way, of course, is simply to try and get together enough people who are well known and make an appeal. simply in order to get together, in order to discuss it. It'll probably get nowhere in the end, but it'll begin something, possibly, just possibly. And then we might learn something about that. We could have study groups over Britain. In other words, what I'm saying is there are a series of very, very partial measures one can begin with in order to show that there's something there, to call on people to try and begin something. And I think we will begin to get some sort of reply over time. I can't go through all possible ideas one could have as to how to get through. But I'm sure if we were able to get together, that is what we would have to do. We quite evidently can't form a party tomorrow. The other aspect which has been mentioned, for the last point I made, is that, of course, one of the major reasons why nobody wants to join very much is the awfulness of the existing party, the groups, not parties, rather, the awfulness of the existing groups. Now, I think that has to do with the previous history, but that is the case. I mean, you know, somebody who's totally ignorant or wants to beat himself up would actually join the SWP today, quite evidently. And because you have a large number of groups of this kind, because their papers are read at odd times by various people who are on the left, nobody wants to join. On the other hand, you do have tens of thousands of people who've been through the groups who regard themselves on the left, and it's to them, I think, we have to make appeals to begin a process. How it will work out for them from there, I don't know, but I think that is the way we can begin in a very small sort of way. I do think the events will begin to happen very, very quickly, and we may be able to then see a way forward. I'm sure that will happen, but I can't predict it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to treat the subject under two distinct headings. One is the prospect of a reformist party, and other topic is the task of forming a revolutionary communist Marxist party. The former is not, in my view, our task as revolutionaries. I mean, everybody in this room. But we have to form some kind of strategy towards it, because I think it's reasonably likely to arise. It is not, and I agree with what is previously said, it's not a sort of halfway house that is sometimes labeled towards a revolutionary party. The halfway house suggests that it's on the same continuum. The difference is analog, as it were. It's a continuum, and it's somewhere in the middle from what is now to what we need. And it's nothing like that at all. It's a different kind of prospect. A reformist party is about reforming capitalism, not overthrowing it. A revolutionary party is about superseding capitalism by a revolution. So one is not, certainly one is not a substitute for the other, and nor is it a question of halfway house. But I think it is likely to form. I'm going to enumerate the things that are going for it, and then the obstacles that it faces. And I also have some modest proposals, actually constructive proposals, both in respect to this and in respect to how to go about forming a revolutionary party. So the advantages that are facing those who want to form a reformist party is that, in my view, this niche is vacant. There is no reformist party at present, a major reformist party. The Labour Party is no longer, and I think, you know, I've made my view clear on this. The discussion as to whether it's a bourgeois workers' party is not really the point. It's no longer a party that has a program for reforming capitalism. it is retreated quite obviously from the basic demands of reformist party, even a right-wing reformist party. So in this respect, the niche is vacant. Another advantage that those who want such a party have is that in non-revolutionary times, more workers would actually agree to a reformist program than to a revolutionary one. It is only in revolutionary times that, or in revolutionary situations, that a majority of the working class is likely to move towards the idea of actually overthrowing capitalism. If you do a Gallup poll of those workers who are at all politicized in any sense, you'll find, I'm sure, more in favor of reforming capitalism, but maybe proposing more radical reform. The main obstacle that is facing such a project is that while the political, ideological niche of reformism is vacant, the electoral niche is occupied by the Labour Party. The Labour Party, while it is no longer reformist, occupies, and this electoral niche, and in the horrible electoral system that we have for Westminster, not so much for the Scottish Assembly, but for Westminster, first past the post, it is specifically designed to prevent the formation of alternative parties, radical parties of both left and right. And for a reformist party, this is a crucial obstacle, because reformism requires electoral success. You can, I mean, a reformist party that doesn't have a prospect of getting at least a few members elected to parliament is almost a non-starter, and this actually has been the main difficulty. So this is not our task to form such a party, but we cannot stay aloof from it, I think, and we have to think what kind of demands to, or what kind of intervention to take towards this kind of party. Well, I mean, it's also in terms of what demands one could raise vis-a-vis such a project. Now, I think one kind of demand that is a non-starter is the right to bear arms. In the United States, the right to bear arms is a simple democratic demand. It's in the Constitution, as it were. So, I mean, it's not problematic. In this country, as in the rest of Europe, this is not a reformist demand. I mean, and everyone can see it. If you raise such a demand, you're not raising even a left reformist demand. It's a nonsense, and I think quite wrong to even raise it vis-a-vis a reformist project. But you can aim to radicalize a reformist project, make it left reformist rather than right reformist by raising certain demands that are perfectly reasonable in the present situation. For example, nationalization of the banks, renationalization of the railways. This will be very popular, and this is a left reformist demand in the present situation. And yes, Steve has raised the idea of republicanism, the abolition of the monarchy. I think this merits serious consideration. The monarchy is not merely a symbolical institution, but even in its symbolical guise, it is very deeply symbolical and importantly symbolical. What it symbolizes is inherited power and privilege. And although it does not go beyond overthrowing beyond capitalism, I mean, you have obviously capitalist countries that are republics. In this country, it has a radical and radicalizing potential. So this kind of demand, both economic and political, economic nationalization of various things, and political republicanism, and other democratic demands. Now I'm going to address the second part of the topic, and that is the one that is really our task to, I mean, the task of revolutionaries to undertake. The advantages that we have is that it is not necessarily the case that for this project to succeed, at least initially, to get going, as it were, to get off the ground, it's not necessary to have electoral success. You can perfectly well have a mini-mass or a revolutionary party with quite, substantial following without necessarily being successful, certainly not in national elections. It's not necessary. So that is an advantage. The other advantage, again, is that this niche is vacant. There is no such thing. The disadvantages, the obstacles, as it were, are that, as I said, this is the other side of the coin of the advantage of reformism. In non-revolutionary situations, only a minority, and probably a small minority of the working class, will actually follow a revolutionary program. The tendency to reformism will be probably stronger in the grassroots. So this is, and this actually is a point that was addressed by Hillel. A lot of work needs to be done, educational and other, in order to convince a non-negligible part of the working class that overthrowing capitalism is a serious project. Okay, now to my constructive, modest proposal. I think we should learn from the experience of the CMP. I'm not going to go into detail to do an autopsy, but I think we should learn from some mistakes. First of all, I think it was wrong to, I think that the whole thing blew up when the CMPs wanted to work out a program, a fairly detailed program or programmatic document. That is when differences emerged quite early and too soon, and the whole thing really exploded. I think working on the basis of the initial, what were the 13 or 16 principles, this is what brought me to the project. Something like that for quite a long time would have been enough. Another, I think, mistake from which we should learn, I want to take up a remark, I think very important remark that Mike made yesterday, that revolutionary projects usually start from an international starting point. And I think perhaps the idea of forming first a revolutionary party in Britain, and then maybe other countries will do likewise, and then at the end of some a process like that, these national revolutionary parties will get together to form an international party. Maybe this is looking at it from the wrong end of the telescope. Perhaps we should start from forming an international entity. I mean entity, you cannot start, certainly on an international basis, even less than on a national basis, to form a party with discipline and so on, but you can form a network, or to use a traditional, maybe an old label, a corresponding society. Those of us who knows the history of the revolutionary movement know that this is how the first international was. Yeah. I think a corresponding society, but using for the purpose of correspondence the available means of communication, which make such correspondence much easier. It's not a question of anything goes, anyone can join, but joining on the basis of something like the principles that initiated the CMP. Now, if we look around this room only, the international contracts and the international groups that people in this room are in touch with already could be a starting point for an international network. This has to be very carefully and cautiously undertaken, and I think this is probably a more promising way to go about forming a revolutionary party, which would be international from the very beginning. Thank you.
This time last year, or shortly after last year's Communist University, I applied to join the Communist Party of Great Britain. And I received lots of documents, written very carefully. I received a visit in my house from Mark, had long discussions. I totally accepted the programme of the Communist Party, and I don't know what happened by it, but despite having always had extremely good relationships with the comrades here every summer, for some reason, not a lot happened. I want to say a little bit about this organisation that runs these events. I want to say a bit about fundamental Marxist philosophy, needs repeating, go over some of the things which happened, the dramas that Hillel talked about, Halloween party, the G20, and so on. A bit on the Labour Party, and then conclude with maybe some suggestions. So, I've mentioned that I've tried to join, and wanted to join, and still would like to join the Communist Party. We need a Communist Party. I want to join, please, okay? Point 2. Thesis on Feuerbach rather needs saying. I mean, I can't read them all out, so maybe I won't read thesis 1, it's a bit too long, but anyway, the question whether thesis 2, objective truth, can be attributed to human thinking, is not a question of theory, but is a practical question. Man must prove the truth, i.e. the reality and power of the this-sidedness of his thinking in practice. Thesis 3 says much the same thing. 8. All social life is essentially practical. All mysteries which lead theory to mysticism find their rational solution in human practice and in the comprehension of this practice. Thesis 9. The highest point reached by contemplative materialism, note the word contemplative, that is, materialism which doesn't comprehend sensuousness as practical activity, as subjective, is the contemplation of individuals and of civil society. And finally, thesis 11, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. The whole point of Marx and Engels, the German ideology, everything they wrote, is that you don't go around saying, oh my God, the problem is people's consciousness, let's address their consciousness. That's the young Hegelian's idea. You cannot do it, it doesn't work. Marxism explains why people have the consciousness they do. The class, which is the material force dominating in society, will be the dominant intellectual force. How do you deal with that? You have to break the material power of the ruling class. You need a countervailing material force to do that. That has to be the working class. And I kind of laugh when I think about this argument about whether or not we want to arm the working class as a sort of immediate demand. I mean, for God's sake, start with something concrete. Get under the Isle of Wight, Vestas. We needed a few bodies on the line. We needed the bailiffs were coming to evict some workers in occupation down there. We could have done with a few hundred comrades. Stop the bailiffs. Keep the occupation going. It would have been a spark lighting up the landscape. It's probably the most popular occupation in British history, with about 6 workers in their place. So instead of talking about whether or not we need to disband the army, I mean, start with something practical, please, comrades. Right. Distributed something here. I mean, you know, it's what we've been saying, it's what Lars was saying about what Lenin was doing. The communists do not form a separate party opposed to the other working class parties. They have no interest separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mould the proletarian movement, etc., etc. Exactly what Lars was explaining to us was Lenin's position. So, I mean, consciousness is, of course, important. Of course it's important. What do you think? I'm a scientist. Of course science is important. But the consciousness which we need, which the class needs, we have to be part of the class, we are part of the class, if we're even relevant, is the consciousness of our own strength. That's what's needed. And we cannot be conscious of our strength if we're not doing anything. Because if we're not doing anything, we don't have any strength. We're not connected. We're not doing anything. Our consciousness, no matter what's in our heads, it won't be revolutionary consciousness. What do the reformists do? What does the bureaucracy do? The trade union bureaucracy and the others. What do they do? The two things. First of all, they make damn sure that the different sections of the class are divided, that the different struggles aren't linked up, that any dispute is defeated if it can possibly be defeated. So first of all, obstruct the real strength of the class. Make sure that the class stays as weak as possible. Secondly, drum into the working class how weak they are, how dependent they are on the politicians. Therefore, it's perfectly simple. What do revolutionaries do? We do the exact opposite. We link the struggles. And insofar as the struggles get even a tiny bit linked, we bring to all sections whatever strength we've got, locally, nationally, internationally. If we're not doing anything, we won't be in a position to disseminate any sense of empowerment, any sense of strength, because nothing's happening. Now, I mean, when Hillel says, he's very honest, such a contribution, I've got no solutions. Let me tell you this. Krishna, I have no solutions. It doesn't matter what's in my head, that is not a solution. I can be a scientist, I can be a marketer, whatever is in my head, it makes no damn difference whatsoever. I don't have a solution. Maybe in this room we have a little bit more likely possible solution. As I said, a few of us down at the Isle of Wight, last week would have been good. But move it forward a bit. We, the left, sections of the class that haven't got into the movement yet, like investors in the Isle of Wight, didn't know what a trade union was. Okay, we collectively, yes, we may have a solution. But to be a solution, to have a solution, we have to start connecting. We have to move in some practical way. Now, okay, the G20. I mean, I wrote something for the Weekly Worker, kind of in a way humorous. Perhaps I'll just say that when Lehman Brothers collapsed last September, my instinct, I kind of apologise. People were lying on my friend and were saying, "Why are you laughing, Chris?" And I said, "Well, it's not funny. People are going to be out of work. There's going to be all these bankers, Lehman Brothers, carrying their boxes out in Canary Wharf. Oh, that's so terrible. Oh, they're all out of work." Why did I feel like laughing? I mean, the funny thing was these bankers, in America particularly, but over here as well, suddenly agreeing with one of the formulations, that's the most famous one, of Karl Marx. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. We have these bankers coming to us, the taxpayer, to society, to the government, saying our abilities at this moment in time are severely limited. However, we've got enormous needs. We've got a yacht to repair. We've got all kinds of things to do. Please subsidise our needs. So here we have, they ideologically completely lost it. Agreeing basically with socialism, or communism, of course, communism for the rich. And the point is that a programme, when the bankers, the ruling class, suddenly agree that communism's fine, or socialism's fine, but as long as it's kept for the rich, you know that isn't going to work, that is unsustainable. And it's kind of comical. And the class, we need a break. We need to be able to see the kind of humorous side of a crisis like this. So, I mean, I won't go on about it, but I mean, I wrote a thing called, October Thesis, marking immediately the moment of transition. The moment of transition, the thing that Hillel's talked about, the fact that it's not business as usual, the fact that something's happened, well, that happened in the middle of September last year. Lehman Brothers, that collapsed. That was, and Marxists, anybody actually, even any intelligence on the left, needed to mark that in some way. Okay, we had a Halloween party, Canary Wharf. It wasn't a revolution, but it's a damn sight more relevant than what the rest of it. I mean, at least the SWP students, like, you know, they went up to the Bank of England, had a bit of a demonstration up there. A lot of them came to the Canary Wharf thing. We've got some little thing up and running, something with doing something. However much you criticise it, and I will say this, I will say, if I'd been a member of this Communist Party, your group here, and we had a few more people, and maybe I'd sobered down a bit because we'd had a few more discussions, maybe the thing would have been a bit more balanced, a bit more measured, a bit more connected with the class and all that stuff. I don't doubt all that, but, you know, almost any kind of action, to be honest, on the right side of the barricades is better than complete graveyard silence. As it so happened, of course, I mean, this is a funny thing, listen, I think. It's just like, do communists realise this? If it hadn't been for me in a slightly mad state at that stage, and then my friend Camilla here, Simon over there, about 4 or 5 of us, if we hadn't decided, Tim, of course, a small number of us, that something needed to be done in response to Barack Obama and these finance ministers from around the world, the provocation of that crowd coming to London demanding more taxpayers' money to meet their effing needs, the provocation of them, especially from where I work at UEL, it's like coming down 500 yards away from where I work, to do nothing, to not respond in any way at all. I can't understand it. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that even with about 5 of us, 6 of us, 7 of us, I don't know, obviously we managed to mobilise, what was it, about 30,000 people? Something like that.
And many of them young people.
Many of the young people never been involved in politics before. We drew on our anthropology, because those of us that worked within the UEL, we decided to make it a carnival. We decided to use loud, in a way, sexy symbols, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and all that stuff, you know, to make a point, because to be honest, I haven't got a copy of the weekly work for now, but I mean, if you just go around with a great long text of about 8,000 words, all in very, very small print, you give to somebody, they may not kind of react to it quite as soon and quickly as they do if you do something a bit more, you know, with a bit more impact. So anyway, we did that, and I'll say this to you, I've got no regrets. I am proud of what a small number of us managed to do. It made a difference. Never mind arming the people, we had police violence, direct violence by the state. And we, in a sense, taught them a bit of a lesson. They will not do quite that thing again, the kettling and all that stuff, in the near future. We turned the tables to an extent on the cops. They were photographed killing somebody at Evening Standard Summer and beating up, you know, a whole lot of other people. Immediately after that, we set up the United Campaign Against Police Violence. SWP comrades at the senior level, Martin Smith and others, immediately saw this. By the way, I have to say, the SWP, as you probably know, the G20 thing, they moved all their comrades. Where did they go? Instead of coming to the banks where everyone thought it was a logical thing to do, we've got bankers turning up asking for more money. Go to hit the fucking banks. Sorry, my language. The SWP marked everyone down. It's like a C&D thing down to the American Embassy. Anyway, they all know that was a mistake. They should have been with us at the Bank of England. Actually, Martin Smith and a few others were. Immediately after that, we set up the United Campaign Against Police Violence. It's still going. It's a useful campaign. You know, does comrades realise this? We've now re-encouraged, reignited the issues of death in police custody in Brixton. We've got many black families whose loved ones have been killed by the police in police custody, coming back into action, thinking, okay, if the police can be hounded for killing Ian Tomlinson, the white working class newspaper seller, what about the hundreds of black people who've been killed in police custody? Why not reopen those issues? And in fact, this Friday, there's a Sean Rigg demonstration in Brixton, outside the Brixton precinct. Now, I'm just giving examples of things we can get stuck into. There's Vestas, there's the police violence thing, the death in police custody, things which... Now, let me just... 2 minutes, I've only got 2 minutes. Okay, okay. Victor's got to cut it down to 3 minutes, but how do I do this? Right, okay. Comrades, I understand we can't do everything. You're a tiny little group. And it's really important, believe you me, I think the paper is fantastic. I read it every week. It's brilliant. The stuff on Iran is second to none. I've never read such brilliant, insightful articles on what's happening in Iran. I read it, relish to find out what's happening. You don't see it anywhere else. And many other articles. I understand you can't all be everywhere at once, but the point is, don't replicate being a tiny little section. by being a tiny little sect and not getting involved in stuff. I'm going to finish very shortly, but just say, when Ben spoke, lovely to say what a mass communist party might look like. We don't want to be a sect, we want to be a mass party of the working class. What would a mass party of the working class look like? Well, it would look rather like, wouldn't it? Rather like the German Social Democratic Party prior to World War I. So why don't we just dream of it? A mass revolutionary working class party. I mean, it would be involved in like everything, pretty much. Churches, in the army, music, you'd have brass bands, jazz bands, dance, poetry, science. I mean, we'd be doing all those things as well as the street theatre. I don't know, picket lines. We'd be doing all these things. We'd be doing everything, if you like. Everything we need to do. I understand you can't do that, but I'm point. In principle, in embryo, in some kind of beginning germinal way, the party, if it's to be the seed of the revolutionary party, has to embody all of that. Don't close doors, comrades. Don't shut out all those many comrades who now know we need a revolutionary communist party. I've got one proposal at the end, a very small one. Why don't you let me join? And okay, hello. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, since you brought up a question on democracy, I don't understand why you don't understand the point. The point is what determines the present position. It's capital. It's not voting for X, Y, Z. It's capital. Capital is not democratic. It will never allow a democracy in the sense you're talking about. It's not going to allow people to vote in the board of directors of a bank, is it? Obviously not. It will not allow somebody to vote in a particular manager. No, it won't. It won't change the vice chancellor. It won't allow the changing of the hierarchical bureaucratic structure in a university or in an institution. Capital control. If capital doesn't control, it falls down. That's the beginning and end of it. Which comes to the same thing as saying there is no revisionist, there is no reformist way forward today.
Agreed.
Okay, then fight capital and go for the market, attack the market. That's why I think Chris's G20 thing was so good, because it put the market first. We must attack the market. And people understand that. We talk about democracy. Obviously, I'm not against democracy. I'm in favour in your sense. For God's sake, you know, I've been saying this for, what is it, for 5 years? I mean, I would have thought such an elementary point I made 101 times before you understand what I'm saying, and not attack me as if I'm an anti-democrat, which is what you're doing. The point is, what is crucial? It is capital, it is the market. We oppose the market. So we say we oppose the market. Yeah. That's the point. We are socialists because we oppose the market and we only go to socialism. That's where we are. We just go, democracy, democracy, democracy. Okay? Of course we love democracy, so how do you get there? What's stopping it? What do people actually want today? You refer to the fact that people in university are against the bureaucrats. Okay, in university they're against bureaucrats. Most people simply want a decent standard of living. They don't like their wage being determined by the market, their standard of living determined by the market. They don't like being controlled by capital as a whole in their work. That's what they oppose. That's the immediate question. It's not democracy for most people, although it's there and it is a real question, as you rightly say. But the immediate question is what they're getting, what the position is, what the job is, to have a job at all, and so forth. That's the issues. Those are the issues we have to fight for immediately now. And this brings me to what Moshe said about the possibility of a reformist party. I think that's out of the question. It can't happen because it's no room for it. When Lenin correctly pointed out that the reformist party was dependent, as he argued, on the aristocracy of labour, I think it's true. It depended on imperialism. It may not be wholly the aristocracy of labour. It did depend on imperialism. It does depend on the whole economic situation. And the economic situation is now against it. The Labour Party is what it is today, not because Tony Blair decided to become that, but because it could only go that way. It had to go to the right or the left. It wasn't going to go to the left, so it went to the right. That's where it is. It's a bourgeois party. You want to add workers to, you're welcome to do it. I think it's crazy, but you're welcome to do it. Okay. But it's a bourgeois party, straightforward, revisionist, not at all. It's a good bourgeois party. You want to call it bourgeois, bourgeois workers' party, fine. So that is the reality. That's why the only way forward today is towards socialism with a genuine workers' party or a Marxist party. That is the only way that society can go and way we can go. When I said I had no solution, it wasn't that I don't support it. I don't see the immediate way to connect to that, to get people to join it. It's not that I don't think that people aren't there. The problem is the question of conscience. Now, okay, so Chris says, okay, we have to do something. Well, it's true, we have to do something in order to attract people. That's absolutely true. We do. But we have to be careful, which I'm sure you're not in favour of it either, but action for action's sake isn't the way forward. It leads absolutely nowhere and often leads backwards. And I'm sure you're in favour of it. So, yeah, okay, but all I was saying is I don't exactly know how to do this. So then I made a number of suggestions of things which I think can be implemented immediately. But certainly, if we can find a way to interact, one is certainly going out in the streets and demonstrations, etc., that's obvious. But there'll be other ways too, no doubt over time. I would fully support doing precisely that, if we can find a way of actually doing it. Thank you.
On democracy, I am in favour of dictatorship. Simple as that. Okay? At the moment, we live under a dictatorship of the rich. When workers feel that there's no democracy, and it's not because they think there's still a monarchy or a few people in the House of Lords, but when they feel there's no democracy, it's because all the politicians are the same. All the politicians, they're all the bankers' politicians, they're all the same, they're all bought by the rich, they're all completely corrupt, they're all lining their pockets. We don't have a democracy. That's how they think. They don't think it's because we've still got, you know, somebody in Buckingham Palace, although that might be part of the problem. It's quite a minor part as far as they're concerned. So I completely agree with Hillel. If we're in favour of democracy, we have to take the fact of the dictatorship as it is and say what would be very good in a government would be to reverse it. Let's have us and any government we elect dictating to the rich, dictating to the bankers, expropriating them, nationalising without compensation, starting with maybe investors. I mean, what I'm saying is you cannot have democracy without dictatorship. If you live under a dictatorship, someone's going to dictate to somebody until you get to democracy. The idea is going to abstract asking for democracy without mentioning the fact we live under a bankers and capitalist dictatorship is ludicrous. I want to know where in the programme, as an immediate demand, the Marxist demand for the dictatorship of the proletariat, where is it? Because I stand for it, and I want to know where it is as an immediate demand. Now, to demand like getting a gun as an immediate demand, like go down to the nearest gun shop and arm yourself, the right to bear arms is, again, I mean, luckily, I know that John isn't as crazy as that. I know that actually you're not completely, totally off the wall insane. I know that you're not, thank goodness. Okay, so there must be something. But I mean, having arguments about splits over the immediate right to bear arms is, again, insane. I mean, I'm quite proud to be kind of branded a little bit mad over something, but I mean, there's insanity and insanity. That kind of insanity is really, I mean, it's sad. You need to get out of it. Please don't go to Bob Pro's, no to the EU, and say, right, are you for the immediate right to bear arms? Because if not, we can't vote for you. And instead, we bloody vote for New Labour. I mean, come on, again, it's a form of insanity which can only emerge in a kind of group which has got itself into a bit of a trajectory, rather like a religious sect, unfortunately, at its worst can do, like the Jehovah's Witnesses. They go into incredible detail about exactly what's going to happen to Jesus and all sorts of stuff. I mean, luckily, you're all saying, you know, no, really, pretty much. But, so, okay, now, just a few other things. Okay, I don't know how to put all this really, but I haven't got to. Again, it's just like, oh dear, everyone laughs in the communist service. I can't remember your name. Oh dear, the workers are hungry, we baked them a cake. Oh my God, the SWP come and steal the cake. I mean, where are your heads, comrades, if you feel that the main problem in the world at the moment is that the workers' cake is going to be taken by capitalism and the ruling class and bankers and all of it. It's going to be like snatched from them by the SWP. I mean, really? I mean, don't be so scared of the SWP. There's some very good comrades in the SWP. They're completely split on all sorts of issues. I mean, get in there, fight. You'll find actually if you get into a real struggle, a large part of the SWP under the impact of events will be actually with us. I mean, the idea to steal the cake, I just cannot understand. Anyway, the main point I wanted to say in my initial contribution was this, and it seems to have escaped me. It's like, it's the extraordinary sort of, it's like the theory's brilliant, the program's great, the paper's a wonderful read. It's the in practice that it's like if the paper was like filling its pages in addition with all this theoretical stuff with say I mean here we have Tim who's like organises fantastic things when he's around from time to time.
One-man band.
Like a one-man band producing like the Tube Workers Support Group network, the Vestas campaign network, like on the internet, allowing people to get plugged into the action. Now, I would like to see that. I've got to stop now. Okay. Okay. Well, perhaps I'll just finish and it'll kind of make the point. I don't quite know what's going to happen to my application to join the CPGB. I have a feeling that comrades agree that it's quite good to agree to the programme and all the things that doctors don't get, but I have a sort of feeling, especially when Phil spoke, it's like, Chris agrees with the programme, but we don't quite do things this way. We, as sort of 4 or 5 people in the CPGB, will be a little bit uncomfortable if I join the CPGB. The point is, obviously, if I did join the CPGB, it would be a bit indigestible. I understand that. There will be one or two problems. For example, Camilla might want to join as well, and maybe Simon might even want to come back and join. And there might be a few other people from around the place that might want to join this rather pluralist, growing, big party, maybe double the size it was before, and in a few months' time, actually finding it has got the resources to start to do a paper and get down to Vestas. And of course, then the tiny little group mentality where we're all feeling very safe and you can carry on these discussions in this particular way, business as usual, would all be, fall apart. And so I have a fear that it'll be like a sort of flying amber. Chris and I sort of starts to join, sort of gets frozen. We've sort of got a funny kind of in, half out relationship. We meet each other every summer and so on. But I would hope that doesn't happen. I mean, honestly, if this party can't accept me as a communist, it's not. There must be lots of other people who are equally brilliant. Whatever. You think the theory is brilliant. You think the theory is brilliant that we've got. Yeah. And okay, so I mean, if this party can't accept Chris Knight, there must be a lot of other people who should be in a party that you can't accept. And you're just gonna. It's a shame. I don't see any reason for it. Why don't you just take the plunge, see what happens? It can't be much worse than it is already. And I would suggest it would be quite a lot better, because I think a few things could start to happen, a bit of chemistry, and we could even find that we can keep the paper running and do a little bit more than hoping, do a few more practical things, and then we can actually implement Marx's point about the primacy of practice, and if you're not involved in practice, your theory won't be too much use to anybody.
Well, I sometimes despair. I thought I spoke very clearly. Maybe it's my accent, I don't know. I made a very clear separation between 2 sets of demands. One, that one would raise vis-a-vis a reformist party that may arise, and the other is what a revolutionary party should, which is what we should be constructing, should and then in response, people confuse the 2 things, and my reformist demands were not revolutionary enough, and my revolutionary demands were too revolutionary for reform. Well, let me put it this way. You need 2 sets of demands. Whether or not a reformist party will come into existence, Hillel and I and maybe other comrades disagree with one another. But you need two sets of demand anyway, because any revolutionary party needs a minimum program and a maximum program. A minimum program is a program that you can also raise vis-a-vis reformist parties if they exist. Maximum program is a program for the overthrow of capitalism and institution of that. Let me give you just a few examples from what has been mentioned. Demand for a republic is a reformist demand. It can be realized under capitalism, but it's still useful in the situation of the United Kingdom. Kingdom, it is called. Overthrow of the state, which was counterposed to it, is a maximum demand. That means revolution. Struggle against police violence is a reformist demand. Arming of the workers is a revolutionary demand. It can only make sense in a situation of, the right to bear arms is a revolutionary demand. It doesn't make sense under capitalism. A British party is, in my view, in its logic, a reformist idea. An international party goes in the direction of revolution. Nationalization of the banks and the railways is a reformist demand. It has actually existed in this country, and remember, steel was renationalized under a Labour government. It wasn't nationalized once, it was nationalized twice, and denationalized, privatized twice. Production for need is a revolutionary demand. Now I come to democracy. I think that the issue of democracy has been misunderstood and misrepresented both by Hillel, Ticktin and by those who argued against it. We should revert. I think Kautsky has been mentioned several times here, but one of the most important theoretical contributions of Kautsky was the following. Demand for political democracy is a reformist demand. And under capitalism there exists political democracy in a truncated, distorted, but nevertheless reformed. If you compare British capitalism to Iranian capitalism, you realize immediately what I mean.
2 minutes.
What socialism conceals, all right, Hillel wants to abolish the market and abolish private property in the means of production. What would they be replaced by? They would be replaced by self-management and planned economy. This is economic and socio-economic democracy. Socialism consists in extending the political democracy from its truncated and limited form under capitalism to democracy which encompasses all spheres of social life. I thought, some of us has invented it. Actually, I discovered that Kautsky had said it ages ago. But it's absolutely right. This is what socialism is. Socialism is democracy. Democracy extended to all spheres of social life. Self-management and planned economy is democracy. Democracy not in the form that it exists under capitalism, but in the form that everyone who wants a better society really wants. To actually chuck away the slogan of democracy is insane. Is really stupid, because democracy is much more popular among the working class than the term socialism and communism, for which we have to do a lot of educational work. You don't have to educate workers to want democracy. You have to actually explain that democracy is too limited in this society. And just one small point. What I was suggesting is a network, and a network is not like the USEC and all these other self-described revolutionary parties, because they are parties. What is needed is something that cannot be taken over by the SWP because it is a network. There are now in existence in other spheres, in the internet and so on, using modern present-day means of communication, networks that are impossible for any cabal like the SWP to take over. This is, I think, what is needed as a starting point. It's not the end of the road, but it's a starting point. And by the way, a program is also a process. Somebody said, I think you said, that you can't create a party without a program. Actually, excuse me, the CPGB is now working on its program. It existed for years without a program. A program is something that you work out. You start from some fundamental principles, and then you gradually, through practice, you work out a program.
Okay, there's quite a lot of stuff. Firstly, on Hillel, it seems a shame everyone's responding to him when he's not here. But I find it quite odd in Hillel that he says, okay, we oppose the market, we oppose the market. And some of the things that Hillel's been explaining this week have been very interesting about the role of the state in the market. Right? The capitalism is, we're against capitalism, but it organises and always has done via the state. The question is of how to positively overcome that, and that's precisely why the working class needs a programme of democracy for state power. Another thing about how to get to this organisation, and I think Hillel's approach is wrong, because, and a few comments underline that. He says, well, he talks of the desperate cadre in the SWP, almost as an offhand rejection of those who will go maybe on an anti-war demonstration, etc., young people, and sign up to the SWP because they want to change the world. I think actually, as Comrade Mike in particular pointed out, fighting for the party we need necessitates that we speak to these people. You cannot go around the existing left as is organised. Alan makes the point you can't go around them because they're in the way. The left is obviously part of the answer, but it's also part of the problem that we have to get through to overcome. And that's the lesson, I think, which could be positively gleaned from the experience of the Leninist faction and the way it came about. It fought. Okay, maybe it started too late and couldn't then take on forces of opportunism and liquidationism in the Communist Party, but it fought, and that's precisely what we need to do in arguing for the organisation we so obviously need. Chris, I do find it a bit strange in trying to pin you down, because on one level you make some very clear and coherent arguments for a particular trend in the workers' movement, then you sort of revert back. So on the one hand you're calling us mad and how, look at where we've gone, but I want to join you. Right, and you've lost it. The problem is, Chris, and okay, so you then say, well, democracy is not important because we live in a dictatorship, etc. We need to enter.
That's why democracy is important.
Okay, good. Okay, fair enough. So that's cleared up there. But you do not share the CPGB strategy for cohering the forces to make a revolution. Last Easter, was it? You were saying, well, this is going to trigger the world revolution. There's nobody in the CPGB who thinks, A, that the world revolution was going to break out, and actually, if it was going to break out, if you were a CPGB, you'd be thinking, Christ, it better not, because we're not in a very good state for it. Precisely because we emphasise the question of party and the centrality of organisation in positively overcoming revolutionary crisis. Not that there was a revolutionary crisis. Anyway, but Chris is obviously sincere revolutionary, and Alan was right in terms of his impatience on these questions. Chris, I do think, in a sense, your obvious position is in the Communist Party, we are fighting for. But we have to be clear about our strategy, what we're fighting for, and I don't think at the moment, given where you are and what you're arguing for, that is necessarily the CPGB, but we can have the discussion, okay? You talked, Chris sort of finished off, and that was definitely the part of your speech I absolutely agreed with. He painted the picture of the SPD, its organisation, its roots, and you're saying, well, dream about that, etc. That's absolutely right, but we have to realise how the SPD was built, how it was cohered, and how it was won. It wasn't just that a group of German communists chased strike to strike and went from every possible organisation they could. It was built on the highest possible working class theory and organisation. We can't play that down and separate it from our practice. At the moment we are weak. We can't be at every struggle, putting all of our hours into it. There are priorities that we've made. And look at the Bolshevik Party. On one hand you say, well, the Weekly Worker is the best paper on the left, absolutely. But then you say at the centre, well, you couldn't go along to a demo with, Front 8, etc. Read Iskra. Read Iskra. Talk to Lars Lee about Iskra when he's actually studying the thing, trying to read it, right, in the libraries. He's got a big magnifying glass so you can actually see the text. Iskra is precisely it's not the project we, emulate. It's actually the tradition we look to stand in. We must cohere the best elements of our class into that formation, and that presupposes a publication like Iskra, or the Neue Zeit for that example, for that matter.
Well, there are pictures on the front.
We do. So I think obviously this discussion has gone in a lot of different ways. I think Moshe gets in a bit of a twist about revolutionary informist demand. He gives an accurate portrayal of Kautsky on democracy. I think Kautsky's wrong, actually, and that's another point. I think Kautsky actually at some point basically says that the bourgeoisie introduces democracy and certain forms, elementary forms of democracy that the workers' revolution has to continue. That's a theoretical dispute. But precisely, I think what you are wrong about the minimum programme. What is the minimum programme? What is it we argue for? The minimum programme of extreme democracy is put it. We are fighting for the minimum that we would take in order to take power. It's the programme of working class power. I think what you were doing, Moshe, you were sort of putting that onto the maximum programme. It is the programme for now, what we need to organise around and what we need to fight for. That is the democratic republic, the form of working class power. That's what the minimum programme's about. And I agree, that's what we need to be discussing and cohering around, because halfway houses and this sort of stuff is completely illusion. We advocate our principles in order to become a majority. We don't become a majority in order to advocate our principles. That's the underlying point.